The exquisite agony in Ilara's arches had become a dull, persistent throb, a painful rhythm matching the sultry, slow jazz bleeding from the orchestra. She'd been balancing the silver tray, heavy with flutes of champagne, for 4 straight hours. The mask, a simple confection of black lace and feathers, was starting to itch, and the smile plastered on her face felt like cracking porcelain. This was the Crescent Moon Masquerade, the most exclusive, decadent event in New Orleans. It was a night where the city's elite, and others, older, stranger, who preferred the shadows, gathered to trade secrets and flaunt their wealth within the historic, jasmine-scented walls of the Dominion. To Ilara, it was just a job. A $500 tip, if she survived the night, meant another week of Liam's experimental treatment. Liam, her younger brother. The thought of him, pale and weak in his hospital bed, fighting a rare blood-borne illness that baffled doctors, was the only thing that kept her moving. That $500 wasn't a luxury. It was a lifeline. "Refill, Table 7," the event manager hissed, his own mask a grotesque, grinning harlequin. Ilara nodded, adjusting the heavy tray. Table 7 was the loudest in the grand ballroom. It wasn't the old, quiet power that dripped from the other tables, the ones with masks of porcelain birds and Venetian silver. This was new money, brash, loud, and careless. At its head sat Julian Thorne, the Silicon Bayou's reigning boy king. He'd built an empire on an app that predicted viral trends, and he wore his arrogance like the $20,000 white linen suit that clung to his frame. His mask was a snarling silver wolf. His voice, amplified by alcohol, cut across the music. The entire board was ancient, he bragged, gesticulating wildly. Dinosaurs! So I didn't just buy the company. I'm gutting it, firing them all, publicly. It's about sending a message. His friends, a collection of lesser wolves and foxes, laughed in appreciation. Ilara approached with the silent, practiced grace of a seasoned server. Her exhaustion was a heavy cloak, but Liam's face was her focus. She moved between the chairs, balancing the tray, the golden liquid shimmering. "Champagne, sir?" Julian didn't even look up. He was scrolling through his phone, his thumb flicking aggressively. He thrust his empty glass in her general direction without a word, like she was an automaton, a piece of furniture. She poured carefully, the stream smooth and steady. Her hand, a rock. She was almost done. Just one more glass. "Julian, my man!" One of his friends, Brosnan, his mask a leering fox, shouted, clapping Julian hard on the back. The impact sent Julian lurching forward. He collided with Ilara's arm. Time seemed to slow. The heavy silver tray tilted. Ilara's desperate gasp was lost in the sound of 6 crystal flutes shattering on the parquet floor. But worse, the entire bottle of vintage Dom Perignon, which she'd been holding to pour, upended itself. A tidal wave of crimson, a specialty rosé, cascaded down the immaculate white linen of Julian Thorne's suit. The splash seemed to echo in the sudden, catastrophic silence. The orchestra faltered, a violin squeaking into stillness. Every masked head in the ballroom turned. Julian Thorne looked down. He saw the spreading, blood-red stain that soaked his chest, his lap, his pride. He slowly, very slowly, raised his head. His eyes, visible behind the silver wolf mask, were glacial. "Oh my God!" Ilara gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The tray clattered to the floor. "Sir, I am so sorry. Let me get napkins. Do you have any idea what you just did?" Julian's voice wasn't a shout. It was a low, venomous hiss that was somehow more terrifying. He stood up, the chair scraping violently against the floor. "Sir, It was an accident. He bumped me." "This suit," Julian interrupted, his voice rising, "is custom-made. $20,000. Alara's world shrank to the red stain and the fury in his eyes. Her $500 tip, Liam's medicine, it all evaporated. "Please, sir, I'll pay for the cleaning. I'll work. I'll—" "Pay?" Julian laughed. It was a sharp, ugly sound. "With what? Your minimum wage? Your tips?" His friends were laughing now too. And worse, Alara saw them. The glint of phone screens. They were raising their devices. The masks of the surrounding guests, once elegant, now seemed predatory, grinning, witnessing her humiliation. Tears burned her eyes, but she wouldn't let them fall. "You destroyed $20,000 worth of artistry because you're too incompetent to hold a bottle," Julian snarled, stepping closer. "You, vile, little, nothing." "Julian, come on, man. It's just a suit," the fox-masked Brosnan muttered, suddenly sobered. "It's not the suit. It's the disrespect," Julian spat. He looked at Alara, her face pale with terror, her hands shaking. "You come in here, serving your betters, and you think you can just contaminate things? You think you can ruin my night and walk away with an 'I'm sorry'?" He looked around, a performer playing to his audience. No, I don't think so. An accident requires recompense. A fair trade." His eyes scanned the room, landing on a nearby dessert cart. Atop it, next to a silver ice bucket, sat a pair of ornate Victorian-style shears, left there perhaps for cutting flowers or cigar tips. They were silver, heavy, and sharp. "Perfect," Julian whispered. Alara's blood didn't just run cold, it turned to ice. What are you doing?" Julian snatched the silver shears from the cart. The metal gleamed under the chandeliers. He advanced on her. "You took something valuable from me, Waitress, so I'm going to take something valuable from you." "No!" Alara cried, stumbling back. "Please! I'm sorry!" "I'll do anything!" Too late for apologies. He lunged. He wasn't a large man, but his rage made him strong. He grabbed a fistful of her long, dark hair. It was her one vanity. Her hair. It fell in a silken curtain to her waist, the hair she'd spent 5 years growing. He yanked her head back, hard enough to make her cry out in pain. "Let's see how pretty you look now," he sneered for the cameras, for his audience. "Stop!" Alara sobbed. "Somebody! Help me!" Nobody moved. The masked guests just watched, a silent, judging sea. The phones were still recording. Julian opened the shears. Snip. A thick, dark lock of hair fell to the floor, coiling like a dead snake on the polished wood. Alara screamed. It was a raw, wounded sound. Snip! 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 He wasn't careful. He wasn't neat. He was hacking, destroying. He grabbed handfuls and sawed them off, leaving jagged, uneven tufts. He was making her look broken. He was making her look destroyed. The crunch of the shears was the only sound in the vast ballroom, punctuated by Alara's desperate, choking sobs. Tears streamed down her face, blurring the grotesque masks of the onlookers. She felt each cut like a physical blow, her dignity being stripped away chunk by chunk, while hundreds watched and did nothing. He laughed the entire time, a breathless, cruel sound. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he released her. He threw her backward so roughly she stumbled and fell to her knees. "There," he said, breathing hard. He tossed the shears, now tangled with strands of her hair, onto the floor beside her. "Now we're even. Your hair for my suit. A fair trade." Alara knelt there, shaking violently, her hands flying to her head. She felt nothing, just jagged, butchered-up spikes. The cool air hit her scalp where long hair used to be. The shame was a physical weight crushing her, burning her from the inside out. The room was silent, save for the suppressed snickers from Table 7 and the quiet clicking of phones capturing her lowest moment. She wanted to die. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her. And then, the great oak doors at the far end of the ballroom, the ones reserved for the Dominion's owner, groaned. They didn't just open. They were flung inward, slamming against the stone walls with a sound like a thunderclap. The music died. The laughter died. A wave of cold, supernatural cold, rolled into the room. It was so intense, the guests shivered, their breath pluming in the suddenly frigid air. The lights in the grand chandeliers flickered wildly, and the string quartet's violins, left unattended, moaned as their strings, tightened by the impossible chill, snapped. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway. He was tall, dressed in a black suit so perfectly tailored it seemed spun from shadows. He wore no mask. He didn't walk. He manifested, moving from the doorway into the center of the room with a silent, fluid grace that was utterly inhuman. The human guests, like Julian, just stared, confused, and suddenly afraid. But the others in the room, the ones whose masks concealed more than just their faces, they knew. Elara saw a woman at the bar, one with glittering cat-eye contacts, go pale as death, drop her glass, and actually bow her head in submission. A man known only as the Baron, who had terrified the staff all night, literally dematerialized into a swirl of shadow and fled. The man, Silas, moved through the crowd, which parted for him not out of politeness, but out of a primal, animal terror. His face was a masterpiece of cold, classical beauty, but tonight it was a mask of annihilation. His eyes, usually a warm, dark brown, were now an abyssal, fathomless black, scanning the room until they landed. They found Elara, kneeling, sobbing, her hands clutching her ruined hair. They found the pool of spilled wine and shattered glass. They found Julian Thorne still holding his phone, a smug, cruel smile frozen on his face. And they found the silver shears, lying on the floor, stained with Elara's hair. Silas reached Elara in 2 silent strides. The wave of power rolling off him was suffocating. He didn't speak. He simply shrugged off his own $1,000 suit jacket, a heavy wool that smelled of old books and winter, and draped it gently over her shaking shoulders, covering her, shielding her, claiming her. He knelt, his gaze softening only for her. "Stai al sicuro, mio cuore," he whispered, his voice a low, velvet rumble that held the power of ages. "Be safe, my heart." He helped her to her feet, guiding her to stand just behind him, placing his body between her and the world. Elara clung to his jacket, the impossible cold of his skin a shocking comfort. Then Silas turned. He turned to face Julian Thorne, and the temperature in the room dropped another 20 degrees. Frost began to spiderweb on the tall ballroom windows. Julian, finally sensing the magnitude of his error, his arrogance faltering, scoffed to cover his fear. "And who the hell are you? Her bouncer?" Silas smiled. It was the most terrifying thing Elara had ever seen. It held no humor, no mercy. It was the smile of a predator that had just cornered its prey. "She," Silas said, his voice quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the frozen room, "is my wife." He took a step toward Julian, his eyes finally, terrifyingly, shifting from black to a deep, burning crimson. "And you," he whispered, "just declared war on a king." "King?" Julian Thorne scoffed, but a tremor of primal fear ran down his spine. The name was absurd, and yet The man before him radiated an authority that made empires and thrones seem like children's toys. The cold in the room was no longer a curiosity. It was a weapon, pressing on Julian's chest, making it hard to breathe. King of what? This Mardi Gras float? Silas's smile vanished, replaced by an emptiness that terrified Julian more than any rage. This building. Silas's voice was still a whisper, but it echoed in every guest's skull. Is named the Dominion for a reason, Mr. Thorne. I have owned it, and the land it rests on, since before this city had a name. This event. I funded it. These people. He gestured to the frozen, masked crowd. They are my guests. You are in my house, breathing my air, and you just assaulted my wife. Julian's blood, which had run cold, now felt like it was turning to sludge. His wife. The incompetent waitress was married to this. He had assumed she was no one. The gravest miscalculation of his life. Look, I don't know who you are, Julian stammered, his bravado shattering. You know exactly who I am, Silas corrected. You felt it the moment I entered. You just lacked the intelligence to understand it. He took a single, measured step forward. Julian flinched and stumbled back. Every strand of hair you cut, Silas said, his voice dangerously conversational, his crimson eyes fixed on the silver shears on the floor, took her years to grow. You enjoyed a few minutes of perverse entertainment at her expense. In return, I will enjoy dismantling your entire pathetic existence. But I will do it far more slowly than you deserve. He looked at Julian's friends, the wolves and foxes still holding their phones, their hands now shaking. You, he pointed a long, pale finger at Brosnan, you filmed this. You laughed. Brosnan's phone clattered from his numb fingers. Your company's IPO is next week, isn't it? Silas mused. It's a fragile thing, a public offering. So easily spooked. Please, Julian's voice cracked. I'll pay. I'll pay for anything. The suit was nothing. I'll buy her new hair. Silas's laughter was the sound of a glacier breaking. You believe this is about money? You believe you can buy your way out of this? You are not a wolf, Julian. You are just a spoiled child playing in a forest full of true predators. And you just tried to wound the one thing the alpha protects. He turned his back on Julian, a sign of ultimate dismissal. He wrapped one arm around Alara, pulling her protectively against his side, his jacket enveloping her. We are leaving. As they moved toward the great oak doors, a woman in a silver cat mask, a countess named Genevieve, intercepted them, bowing her head low. She was one of his. My king, she murmured, her voice for his ears only. The recordings, the humans. The humans will remember a bizarre interruption. The rest, Silas's gaze was lethal, know better than to speak. As for the phones, collect them. Every last one. Find out who recorded. Find out who watched. I want a list by dawn. It will be done, my lord, Genevieve said, melting back into the shadows. Silas did not run. He walked Alara out of the ballroom, his pace measured and regal, leaving behind a room of frozen statues. The moment the doors boomed shut behind them, the music, the laughter, the life of the party was over. Julian Thorne, the Silicon Bayou King, was left alone in the cold, his white suit stained red, his face the color of ash. The ride home was a blur of silence and shadow. Their car, a custom black-on-black Bentley that seemed to absorb the light around it, glided through the humid New Orleans streets. Alara sat huddled in the passenger seat, Silas's massive suit jacket drowning her small frame. She hadn't said a word. She was in shock, her entire body trembling with a violence that had nothing to do with the car's air conditioning. Silas drove, his hands clad in black leather gloves, gripping the wheel. He, too, was silent, but his silence was a living thing. It was an inferno banked, a storm held in check by sheer, millennia-old willpower. The only sound was the faint click as Ilara's trembling fingers repeatedly, unconsciously, ghosted over her scalp, feeling the jagged alien spikes of her ruined hair. They didn't live in a modern penthouse. Their home was a fortress, an ancient two-story Creole mansion in the Garden District, hidden from the street by a curtain of 200-year-old oak trees and wrought-iron fences that looked delicate but were stronger than steel. The instant the car passed the gates, Ilara felt the subtle shift in the air, a wave of protection, of ownership rolling off Silas. This was his true dominion. He parked the car, and in an instant he was at her door, opening it, his movements too fast for the human eye to track. He didn't offer his hand. He simply scooped her up into his arms, as if she weighed nothing. Ilara buried her face in his chest, a dry, hiccuping sob finally escaping her. My bag, my purse, Liam's medicine. I needed that money, Silas. Shh, he rumbled, his voice vibrating through her. Hush, mio cuore. You will never need for anything again. I will handle Liam. I will handle everything. He carried her through the vast, cool, dark foyer, his footsteps echoing on the marble. He bypassed the grand staircase, taking her instead to their private wing, a modern addition of glass and steel hidden within the ancient home's courtyard. He didn't put her down until they were in their bathroom, a chamber of black marble and teak, lit only by the ambient glow of the city lights outside. He sat her gently on a velvet-covered bench. He knelt before her, his cold, strong hands coming up to cup her face. He stared at her, his black and red eyes taking in the tear tracks, the pale skin, the trembling, and the hair. His face contorted in a mask of such profound pain and rage that it stole her breath. He closed his eyes for a second, mastering himself. When he opened them, they were just his eyes, the dark brown she knew, though flecked with an inner fire. He hurt you, he said. It was not a question. It was a damnation. He stood and walked to a cabinet, returning with a first aid kit, a bowl of warm water, and the softest towels she had ever felt. He didn't call for servants. He never did. Not for this. Not for her. He gently, so gently, wet a cloth and began to dab at her face, cleaning away the tear-streaked mascara. Then, his hands, impossibly delicate for a being of such power, moved to her head. He had to wash away the champagne that Julian had splashed on her during the struggle, the grime from the floor. As the warm water touched her abused scalp, the dam of her shock finally broke. It wasn't a scream. It was a low, agonizing wail of pure, undiluted humiliation. The sobs racked her body, stealing her breath. He, she choked, grabbing the front of his shirt. They all watched, Silas. They didn't do anything. They just filmed it. Like I wasn't even human. Just entertainment. Silas's hands froze. His whole body went utterly still. The air in the room, which had warmed, dropped back to freezing. They filmed it, he repeated. His voice was flat, deadly. Yes, they laughed. He laughed. I know, Ilara. He wrapped the towel around her head, pulling her against his chest, holding her as the tremors racked her. He held her for a long time, rocking her, just letting her cry, his chin resting on the top of her head. He let her cry until only shudders remained. Then he held her at arm's length. What he did, Silas said, his voice thick with a resolve that chilled her to the bone, was not just an assault on you. It was an assault on me. It was an assault on our family, on our home, and it will be answered. Silas, no, she whispered, her eyes wide with a new fear. Don't kill him, please. That's not us. That's not you. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. He put his hands on you. In my world, in the world I have kept from you, that is a death sentence. There is no trial. Please, she begged, her hands on his chest. I don't want his death on my conscience. I want my life back. And he ruined it. He ruined my hair. The last words were a fresh sob. Silas looked at the jagged, ugly tufts. He left his mark on you, he said, his voice hardening. We will not allow that. He walked to a drawer and removed a small, elegant pair of black steel barber's shears. He returned and knelt before her again. He took this from you with cruelty, Silas said softly, his hands infinitely gentle as he touched a mangled lock. I will restore it, with love. Trust me. Elara nodded, fresh tears welling. For the next hour, there was no sound but the soft, metallic snip, snip, snip of the shears. He was an artist. His hands, which could crush stone, moved with breathtaking precision. He trimmed away the jagged pieces, evening out the disaster, shaping, sculpting. He wasn't just fixing a bad haircut, he was tending to a wound. He was erasing Julian's violation, replacing it with his own patient, loving care. When he was finished, he gently turned her to face the mirror. Elara gasped. The long, flowing dark hair was gone. In its place was a short, impossibly chic, stylish pixie cut. It framed her delicate features, highlighting her high cheekbones and large, expressive eyes. It was beautiful. It wasn't the hair of a victim. It was the hair of a queen. Silas, she whispered, touching it, her fingers tracing the new, soft lines. You, he said, his voice fierce, his hands on her shoulders, are the most beautiful thing in this world, Elara. With long hair, short hair, or no hair. You are my light. He did not break you. He did not destroy you. He just revealed you. He kissed her forehead, a long, lingering, possessive press of his cold lips. Now, rest. You must rest. He guided her to their bed, and she, exhausted to her very soul, collapsed into the pillows and was instantly asleep. Silas watched her for a full minute, his face a mask of love and warring fury. Then he turned, his black suit jacket still draped over the bench, catching his eye. He picked it up and walked from the room, his movements silent. He went to his study, a room paneled in ancient cypress wood. One wall, a vast window overlooking the sleeping city. He pulled out his phone. He didn't call the police. He didn't call a lawyer. He pressed a single button. Genevieve answered on the first ring. My king? He lives, Silas said, his voice a low growl. She asked for his life, so we will give her his life. But we will take everything else. My lord? The list. The phones. I don't just want the names of those who recorded. I want their digital lives. I want every skeleton in every closet. I want the IPO for Brosnan's company. I want it shorted into oblivion by dawn. He paused, looking at the city lights. As for Mr. Thorne, Silas continued, I want his dreams. I want you to find my kin who are closest to his partners, his investors, his board members. I want them to have nightmares. I want them to wake up with an unshakable visceral dread associated with the name Julian Thorne. A psychic assault, my king. Bold. It will be messy. He wanted entertainment, Genevieve. He will be devastated. And one more thing. I want every newspaper, every blogger, every regulatory body on this planet to receive an anonymous, verified tip by 6 a.m. about every corner Julian Thorne has ever cut, every employee he has ever abused, every tax law he has ever broken. He fancies himself a wolf? I am going to unmake him. I am going to erase him so thoroughly the world will forget he ever existed. He will have his life, and nothing else. Yes, my king. Genevieve's voice was filled with a chilling, sudden glee. It will be a sunrise he'll never forget. Silas hung up. He looked down at his hand. Clutched in his palm was a single, long strand of dark hair he had retrieved from his jacket. Ilara's hair, fallen from the shears. He closed his fist, and the cold in the room became so intense that the window before him cracked, a perfect spider-webbing fracture spreading from the center as the king began his war. Julian Thorne woke to the sound of his world ending. It was not a supernatural scream, but the incessant, frantic, and multiplying buzz of his phone on the marble nightstand. 6:02 a.m. He lunged for it, his head exploding from a night of panicked drinking after the man in the ballroom, the king, had vanished. The screen was an incomprehensible collage of terror. Missed calls, 144, his CFO, his entire legal department, his father, the chairman, and Brosnan, over and over. Market alerts, NASDAQ, THRN, trading halted pending investigation. News headlines, flooding his feed. Forbes, Thorne Technologies implodes, massive whistleblower leak, alleges widespread tax fraud, labor violations. NOLA, advocate, EPA launches emergency probe of green. Thorne data centers following anonymous tip on toxic waste. The Verge, Julian Thorne's empire in freefall amidst allegations of corporate malfeasance. He scrambled for the remote, snapping on the massive television. A morning anchor, her face grim, spoke over a graphic of his face. What appears to be a catastrophic, coordinated takedown. Sources inside Thorne Technologies, who wish to remain anonymous, describe a total system failure, with partners and investors pulling out in a panic not seen since 2008. His phone rang again. He snatched it. What? It was Henderson, his CFO, his voice a hysterical shriek. Julian, what the hell did you do last night? It's a hit job. It's a mistake, Julian stammered, pacing his penthouse, the stained white suit from last night still pooled on the floor. A hit job? Julian, the IRS, the SEC, and the EPA are not a hit job. They're in our lobby. They're raiding the building right now. They have everything. The shell companies, the Cayman accounts, the falsified emissions data. They have the real ledgers, Julian. How did they get the real ledgers? The board, Julian shouted. Call the board. We'll fight this. Henderson let out a high, broken laugh. The board? I just got off a three-way call with Davenport and Wu. They're resigning. They said... Henderson's voice dropped to a terrified whisper. They said they both had the same nightmare, that a man with red eyes told them the House of Thorne was built on poisoned ground and to flee before the walls bleed. They think you're cursed, Julian. They're terrified. The blood drained from Julian's face. King? And Brosnan? Julian whispered. Brosnan! Henderson screamed. His IPO! It's gone! A perfectly executed, massive pre-market short sell. It was wiped out in 90 seconds. He's ruined. We're all ruined. They're coming for me. Oh, God. The line went dead. Julian collapsed onto a sofa. It wasn't a hit job. It was an execution. This wasn't a man. It was a force of nature. It was the promise of a king. Across town, Ilara woke to silence. the heavy, suffocating anxiety that had been her constant companion for 2 years, the fear for Liam, the crushing weight of bills, was gone. She felt light. She woke in the vast, ancient bedroom, sunlight streaming through the windows, and knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that Liam was safe. She sat up and touched her head. Her fingers traced the soft, stylish lines of her new hair. It felt right. It felt like her. She found Silas in his study. He was not in his suit, but in a simple black shirt and pants, standing before the vast, cracked window. In his hand was a glass, not of wine, but of dark, rich blood. The morning news was playing on a muted television, showing a frantic Julian Thorne being mobbed by reporters, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. The headline read, "Silicon Bayou King Dethroned." "You did this," Alara said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact. "I did what was necessary," Silas replied, his voice a low rumble. He turned to face her. His eyes were the dark, warm brown she loved, but a storm of ancient power still raged far beneath the surface. "He is erased. He has his life, as you requested. But he has nothing else. His accounts are frozen. His companies are seized. His partners have abandoned him as if he were diseased. He is nothing. Justice has been served." Ilara walked toward him, her bare feet silent on the old cypress floor. "Is this justice, Silas?" she asked, her voice quiet but strong, unwavering. "Or is it just a bigger, older version of what he did to me?" Silas stilled, his hand freezing on its way to his glass. "Explain." "He used his power, his money and his status, to humiliate someone he thought was powerless. He did it to feel strong, to make an example of me." She stood directly in front of him, meeting his immortal gaze. "You just used your power, your age, your abilities, your influence, to annihilate him. You made him powerless. You did it to show your strength. How is that different?" A dangerous crimson flicker sparked in the depths of his eyes. "It is entirely different. He acted from cruelty. I acted from love. He attacked. I defended what is mine." "And in your defense, you became the attacker," Alara countered, refusing to be intimidated. "You didn't just stop him, Silas. You destroyed him. You terrorized his partners with nightmares. You ruined his friends. You're enjoying this." The silence in the room was absolute, heavy as a shroud. Silas stared at her, the vampire king, a being who had toppled dynasties, being calmly, rationally challenged by a mortal woman who was not afraid of him. "He deserved it," Silas finally said, his voice a low growl of conviction. "Maybe he did," Ilara conceded, placing a warm hand on his cold, stone-like chest. "But we don't. We don't deserve to become this. Don't you see? If power is only used for punishment, if its only expression is complete destruction, then it isn't strength. It's just a tantrum with bigger consequences." It's no better than Julian standing in that ballroom with his silver shears. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the ancient rage warring with his love for her. "You could have just had him arrested," she said softly. "The people in that room, the phones, Genevieve must have gotten the videos." "She secured them all," Silas said, his voice clipped. "They clearly show his face. And yours." "Then use them," Ilara pleaded. "Let the human world handle his human crime. What you did, this financial and psychic war, this is a monster's justice. I didn't marry a monster, Silas. I married a man, a good man, who just happens to be more." Silas looked from her face, so full of passionate conviction, to the TV, where Julian was now openly weeping, as he was physically blocked from entering his own building. Silas had won. He had proven his point, but Ilara's words, she was not horrified by his power. She was disappointed in his application of it. That, he found, cut deeper than any blade. A sharp, jarring buzz echoed through the mansion from the modern intercom. Silas's head snapped up, his senses on high alert. "Genevieve is at the main gate," he said, his eyes narrowing. "She is not alone." His phone vibrated. He read the text. "He is here. Julian Thorne." He drove past the reporters, evaded security, and is at the gate, on foot. He is begging to see you, to see us. He is broken, my king. He's on his knees, in the street. "Don't let him in," Ilara said immediately, a protective hand on Silas's arm. "No," Silas said, his eyes hardening with a new, cold understanding. "He will come in. He needs to see you, and you need to see him. Not as a victim, but as a queen." A few minutes later, Julian Thorne was escorted into the grand foyer by two of Silas's guards. He was not the proud wolf. He was a wet, shivering, ruined thing. His hair was matted, he hadn't shaved, and the remnants of his $20,000 suit were wrinkled and foul. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot and wild, and saw Ilara. He saw her standing not in a servant's uniform, but in elegant silk pajamas, her pixie hair framing her face with confidence. He saw her standing not behind, but beside the Vampire King, her hand on his arm, as an equal. "You," Julian whispered, the realization striking him like a physical blow. It was all you. You're with him." He stumbled forward, his legs giving out, and collapsed to his knees on the marble floor. "Please," he sobbed, his voice cracking. His appeal directed entirely at Ilara. "Please, make him stop. I don't know what I did, but I'm sorry. I'm sorry I cut your hair. I was drunk. I was an idiot. I'll pay. I'll give you anything. Just make it stop." Ilara looked down at the man who had, less than 12 hours ago, held her in a grip of terror and humiliation. She felt no fear. She felt no satisfaction. She felt a profound and weary pity. "You can't give me anything, Julian," she said, her voice clear and strong, echoing in the vast room. "You have nothing left to give." It's not fair," he wept, beating a fist on the floor. "My company, my entire life, everything I built, gone, because of a haircut." "It was never about the haircut," Ilara said, stepping forward. Silas tensed, but she put a hand on his arm. And he stilled, trusting her. "It was about dignity. You thought you had the right to take mine because you were rich, and I was a servant. You thought I was nothing. You thought I was invisible. That was your mistake." I'll go to jail. I'll do anything." "Yes, you will," Silas's voice boomed, making Julian jump as if struck. "The police are on their way here. The videos of your assault have been provided to the district attorney. You will be arrested and tried for your actual physical crime. The other misfortunes that have befallen your fraudulent empire," he smiled, a death's head grin, "are simply the universe balancing its books. You are a common criminal, Julian, and now you will be treated as one. Get him out of my sight." As Genevieve and a guard hauled the whimpering, broken man to his feet to hand him over to the NOPD officers waiting at the gate, Julian looked back at Ilara one last time, his eyes filled with insane, helpless rage. You're a monster," he spat. "Both of you." "No," Ilara said softly, as the heavy doors boomed shut. "I'm just a woman who refuses to be invisible. And he's my husband." 3 months later, Julian Thorne, his assets seized by the government and his reputation destroyed, was found guilty of assault and battery. The viral video, released anonymously, had been conclusive. His other, far greater crimes, the tax fraud, the environmental violations, ensured he would spend the next 20 years in a human prison. His ruin was total, but as promised, he had his life. In the gleaming, light-filled corner office of what was once Thorne Technologies' headquarters, Ilara looked over a new proposal. The building, seized in the bankruptcy, had been anonymously purchased by one of Silas's holding companies and donated to a new charitable foundation. A small brass plaque on her new desk read, "The Crescent Foundation, Advocacy and Aid for Service and Labor Workers." Silas stood by the window, which no longer cracked in his presence. He looked at the plaque with a small, appreciative smile. "You didn't name it after him," he noted, handing her a fresh cup of coffee. "No," Ilara said, signing a grant approval that would cover her brother's medical care for life. Liam, now in full remission, believed a medical lottery had paid his bills. "This isn't about him. It's about the lesson." "And what is the lesson?" "My heart?" Silas asked, his voice genuinely curious. Ilara stood and walked to him, her pixie cut now a stylish, confident part of her identity. She took his cold, powerful hands in her warm, human ones. "The lesson is that power, whether it's from money or status, or," she squeezed his hand, "even from 1,000 years of darkness, is not a weapon. It's not a shield to hide behind, and it's not a license to treat others as less than human." She looked out the window at the bustling New Orleans street, where a new food truck, funded by her foundation, was serving a line of customers. What Julian did was an act of profound cruelty, but his true, unforgivable sin was waste. He wasted his power, his influence, and his wealth on arrogance. He thought a person's dignity was a commodity he could take at will. He didn't understand that dignity is the one thing every person is born with, whether they are a billionaire in a custom suit or the woman serving him champagne. She turned back to Silas, her king, her protector, her husband. "And what you did, my love, was an act of justice, but it was almost an act of waste, too. You almost wasted your incredible power on simple, vulgar revenge. But we," she said, rising on her toes to kiss his chin, "we are better than that. We don't just destroy, we build. We took the rubble of his arrogance, and we're building a sanctuary. We're turning his cruelty into our compassion." Silas, the vampire king, the overlord of the Dominion, the monster who had seen empires rise and fall, looked at his mortal wife with an awe he had not felt in centuries. "You have taught me something." "Ilara Moretti," he whispered, pressing a kiss to her knuckles, "that the greatest power is not in making the world fear you. It is in having the strength to protect it, and the compassion to heal it." Ilara smiled, leaning her head against his chest. "See? That's the lesson." "Now," she said, her voice turning practical as she gestured to her laptop, "we have 300 applications for emergency aid to get through before lunch, and I need you to gently remind that landlord on Bourbon Street that unshakable psychic dread is not a valid legal reason to evict his tenants." Silas chuckled, a deep, warm sound that was, for the first time in 1,000 years, completely and utterly human. "As you wish, my heart. As you wish."